Thank you for coming. So, as you all know, I'm pretty anal about the definition of word and how important it is for us to be able to speak the same language, so that with legalization, when somebody orders something from another state or another city, you can at least understand each other, like they do in the coffee industry, in any other industry in the world, where there is some classification that has to be done, and there is a lot about taste and flavor. There is classification that have to be done so that we understand each other. And on the concentrate part, there is a lot of misunderstanding between sieved resin head and extract. They all come under the definition of concentrate. So what is a concentrate for a start? A concentrate, everything that we call concentrate come from those little resin head. Anything that you collect from those resin head is a concentrate. From ash, sieved resin, to pure isolate. Everything in between, all that is concentrate. So, I don't know if you have ever wondered about the origin of concentrate. And to be able to get to the origin of concentrate, you need to be able to understand the origin of the plant. The only thing with the cannabis plant, it has been going through migration with humanity for so long that we cannot actually pinpoint its birthplace. But you have to think that there is three potential birthplaces. China, because the oldest archaeological evidence comes from China, and it's hemp fiber in pottery. The second potential place is the feet of the Himalaya. Some of the oldest written record in human history come from India, and in those records 5,000 years ago, they were saying that cannabis was born in the Himalayan mountain in a drop of the elixir of life that fall from the sky when the gods were fighting to create the elixir of life. And then you have Central Asia. And Central Asia, it's most certainly with India the most two logical place. Central Asia, it's because you can spread the culture widely on the whole continent, and it's the same latitude. It's basically the same climate all the way. We come from Africa, and we moved from Africa 7 million years ago. If the plant was born somewhere in Central Asia, India, China, humanity was from Germany to Papua New Guinea. There is evidence of humanity to almost 2 million years ago, 1.8 million years ago. So, I don't know how long it would take humanity to pick up a cannabis plant that gives not only food, but medicine and fiber. How long would it take these people to pick up a plant that, during that time, since it was a megaflora and a megafauna, everything was 3 to 5 times bigger than what we know today. So I don't know how long it would take our ancestors to pick up on that plant, but the fact is, the first thing that can happen when you get close to that plant and you touch it, you enroll resin and you make the first concentrate. The first person that touched a cannabis plant to pick up the seeds or whatever they wanted, they got resin on their hand, for sure. Humanity, to create agriculture, went through 200,000 plants, just the ones that make seeds and fruit. From those 200,000 plants, there is 1,000 or so that are edible, 100 or so that can be domesticated, and a dozen that are still feeding the planet. Since 13,000 BC, we have not domesticated a new plant or a new animal. Those people had a relation with the plant kingdom and an understanding of the plant that was pretty amazing. So the chance for those people to test the resin that he collected on his hand to discover the property of that new plant is very, very, very high. And until recently, I always thought that the plant is created by nature to produce cannabinoid. But I thought that THC synthase was one of the first synthase, that the plant was psychoactive at the time where our first ancestor touched that plant. In fact, no. It seems that the CBD synthase is older than the THC synthase. That means that that plant was medicinal before anything. And because humanity touched it, that plant created a psychoactive compound to lock us down and protect her and make her grow in everywhere she's growing now, from South Africa to Alaska. It is easy to imagine people getting connected when you touch the resin. Live resin is charas. But it's a little bit more difficult to start to understand how people went into the dry sieving. It's like the culture of hash was born somewhere and was hidden from everyone for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. There is nothing about hashish until the 9th, 10th century in a Muslim empire where it's in medicinal treaties. So there is thousands and thousands of years where there is a knowledge of the plant, there is a lot of written record about the cannabis plant. There is nothing about the resin until 9th, 10th century. So to be able to protect something like that, and it's not known from anywhere, it has to add value somehow back in time to be unknown from other culture. When in China the plant was breeded to create hemp and fiber and seed. If you breed a plant on one direction, there is a knowledge that you're getting away from the other, so there is a good chance that people are breeding from the other aspect of the plant. And the oldest hash culture, it's where two potential birthplace of cannabis touch. It's that whole region of the Hindu Kush, Afghanistan. That place, it's in the middle of the Silk Road. The Silk Road start from China, goes through India, Persia, and finish in Lebanon. That means that this is the oldest trade road ever. Everything that is created on one side is funneled through Afghanistan, and there is only one corridor that lets the road pass. That means that they had access to everything that was exchanged from one side of the continent to the other. On top of it, Pakistan is the birthplace of cotton, 7,000 years ago. China is the birthplace of silk, 6,000 years ago. It's a place where they had the potential to find the tool to be able to get to the second dimension of concentrate, dry sieving. To do dry sieving, you need a certain amount of cultivation. Charas, it's landrace, wild. You do not need any tool or any mean to collect plant in order to dry them and to collect the resin in it. You just use your hand. In India and the feet of the Himalaya, it's mandatory because there is too much humidity in the air. You cannot actually dry sieve. Charas is the first live resin ever made. Most of the people think that live resin is BHO. Live resin is any resin that you collect on a plant when she's live. And when you freeze it, you can keep those characteristics. So may it be CO2, may it be butane, or any sort of extraction, live plant goes from collecting it in your hand live in a field to the latest of the and greatest extraction of our day. I want people to really understand that BHO didn't invent live resin. Live resin is the beginning of every concentrate that you know of. Charas has a certain texture that is very special and very different. When you have a live resin, you hold most of the terpene. When you make charas, you lock down a lot of those terp in your resin in your hand, and when it ages, it transforms to new level of taste, but you still can recognize the flavor of the first day when you collected it. But when you collect it the first day, it's kind of a little sharp. It's not yet really ready to smoke. It needs time to settle down to be able to lose that sharpness that you have something fresh. It's very much like drinking a Beaujolais and drinking a wine that is not made to be drunk the first week that it's produced, basically. Then agriculture was born. When you have the potential to have that many plants, you are able to use technology to separate those resin heads from the plant. How our ancestors came to that, it's difficult. I mean, if you see the logic of it, okay, they touch the plant the first time, it's sticky, but if they want to collect the seeds from those plants, they have to bring them to camp and dry them. Those people have been dry sieving all sorts of plant material to separate chaff and seed, so they're not going to harvest a plant when it's dry, when it's live. They would, when you dry it and break the bud, you still got resin sticky on your hand. And the guy must have seen all that white powder falling down. And connect the two, I imagine, because not so long ago, here in California, we didn't really know the value of resin. It's pretty new for you. Imagine that first people, those first person, tens of thousands of years ago, understanding that the power of the plant is inside the resin head that they cannot even see. That relation with the plant must have been really, really special, because to be able to figure that out, we needed science. When you harvest the plant and you look to get the seeds, and it must have been part of the need of the people when they started to cultivate the plant, you start to dry and to cure. And you need to create a tool that will give you the ability to separate contaminant from resin head. Comment on dit ça? Breeding fiber It's one of the oldest human manufacturing that we have ever done. So fiber can go back so far in time. There is, as far as 28,000 years ago, there is the oldest evidence of a fiber that was relatively beautiful because they compare it to a modern linen. That means that the perforation of that fiber must have been pretty amazing. The potential of humanity to have been making hashish on a regular basis can be traced basically to the birth of agriculture, because cannabis is one of the 12 plants that were first cultivated by humanity. This is the second concentrate ever taken from the plant. It's a resin head that has been dried and cured so that the terpene transform and you become another terpene profile, and they create a mass of resin that hold in his body the matrix that created that resin, and it's something that can stand time. Just a little show off of good resin. Now, in a concentrate category, when you come out of the sieving methodology, and ice water is not an extraction, is actually a sieving methodology, and water is actually the only evolution in cannabis resin sieving since cannabis resin sieving has been sieved for the first time. An extraction is when you take the resin from the resin head. An extraction is when you take the juice from a fruit. When you shake a plant, may it be with a mechanical force to make a resin head fall and you collect that resin head whole, you do not extract, you're sieving, because you're separating contaminant and resin head through a tool made of perforation, and you agitate before. You have seen it only with a machine and a bag. That's the evolution. Normally dry sieving, it's two processes that you cannot separate. You agitate to break the resin head away from the stock, and you separate at the same time when they fall on your tool and go through this perforation per size. It's exactly what you do with water, except that water gives you the ability to separate those two processes so that you can really perfect them. But it's just an evolution. It's still sieving. You need to get into taking the resin head from the resin from the trichome head to be able to talk about extraction. And the most simple extraction, non-solvent, it's rosin. It's using heat and pressure. I really thought for the longest time that there were no real science behind rosin. I really believe that just pressing and timing it wasn't really a big deal. I learn better now because through mechanical extraction you can literally create THCA. If you can create THCA, you most certainly can do CBDA if you work with high CBD strain, and you can create sauce and pure crystal of THC. It's like it's not as simple as I thought. There is a lot of dimension in the non-solvent extraction, and then you have solvent extraction. Everything that use a product that will dissolve the resin head to be able to get access to the resin inside, it's a solvent extraction. butane, propane, ethanol, alcohol, cryogenic, all that, it's solvent. And not only there is many different type of extraction, but there is many different type of products as well. And as much as when you take the resin from the trichome head, you're stepping out of the entourage effect of the plant. You're stepping into new territory, especially if you start separating terpene. You have to understand that cannabinoids are made of two compounds, phenol and terpene. Phenol is the toxic compound. Phenol, in certain quantity, can make you very sick. And terpene is so toxic that you can kill people with terpene. There is only one plant that not only can transform this into cannabinoid, but make it non-toxic. So when you go into playing a game and separating, you have to be really aware of the potency and the power of the terpene. It's something, aromatherapy is one of the oldest medicine. You can make people do amazing things just by pouring smell into a closed room. And ingesting terpene in high quantity, well, you better know what you're doing. And the final level of extraction, not only when you extract, you have the ability to create amazing number of incredible products, but the end game is isolate. Isolate is something that the big pharma have been trying to do chemically for over 50 years. It's something that they told us we couldn't do to get themselves an excuse to spend I don't know how many billions of dollars to try to create synthetically what that plant is giving us. That means that any kids with a good IQ and $40,000 can make something 90.9% pure, and that's Western medicine. And at that level, when you reintroduce terpene, in certain quantity, terpene not only are half of what a cannabinoid is, but it's what brings it into your cell. It's what make it, give you the ability to absorb it, and it, change the experience that you can have depending on the amount of terpene and the cannabinoid that is used. That means that you could create literally a pharmacopoeia where every cannabinoid and every terpene the plant can produce will be available, and people will be treated by symptom and dose like this. That's something that the Western medicine can use. The thing is, when you use the plant, the terpene profile of the plant, while the terpenes are similar to every other terpene available in the plant kingdom, the terpene profile of the plant is unique. It's made of hundreds of terpene, and a lot of them are such a minute quantity that you don't know how much of it there is. So it's impossible to actually mimic the plant. And that means that the plant gives you literally two medicine, Western and herbal. And now, I understand that the plant is very complicated at every level, and that we need to simplify a lot for everybody to be able to understand the basic. But there is simplification and there is misinformation, so that I cannot accept that seed resin is considered an extract. because it's not. And hashish even more so, because in the booze industry, with what fruit give, there is a lot of different booze, and there is wine. From wine, from a grape, you can take the juice and distill pure alcohol. But to make wine, you need the matrix that created the sugar to be able to have a fermentation. You need the sugar and the skin to be able to have the fermentation. So that nobody would call wine an alcohol. Wine is its own category. It's unique because of the way it's made. Hashish is the same. When you don't press your hash, it's not the same product than when you have pressed your resin. Because when you press resin and you have all those elements, that matrix that created the resin into a mass of resin and terpene that is corrosive, there is a chemical reaction that happens, and there is a transformation that happens naturally, like it happened in wine. And it's a mass of resin that can age and gain in quality in time. It's something that is so unique in what the plant is giving us that there is no right for anybody to use that word ever, especially when you can trace it 1200 years ago to Hashishia, eater of hashish. Now, centuries later, we have so many products that come into so many categories. Oops. And on top of it, we have fresh, frozen, and dry material. It's really important for us to understand the product that we're putting on the market. You call everything hash, but if you could tell a Frenchman or an Indian or anywhere on the planet where it's a hash culture that you're a hash maker and you're an extractor, you're not going to understand each other. And to give you a good idea, when you travel in Europe, we have the bad tendency to call resin head pollen. I had a conversation with a breeder that made it really difficult to understand which pollen we were talking about. And there is a world trade that is coming soon to us, or at least an interstate trade. So how can I order something to you if I want hash, but you don't have the same definition of the word for me? How can I order anything from you? And that's not going even into the taste I want from the product I'm ordering from you. You know what I mean? So that's why I created that matrix. So that by cutting it down into methodology, it is easier to put everything into category. Now when you can digest this, then there is all the different products that are made in all those categories. I think I'm getting close to the end, so if you have questions.
Are you done with your presentation? Ready for questions? Okay, so we'll have people come up over here if you want to ask Frenchie questions. How does nobody not have questions for Frenchie? Wow. Here, come over here. Yeah. I don't want to.
We have somebody there.
Sorry.
Hello.
I guess my question is, you mentioned different varietals of cannabis, or different cannabis can call different things, and with wine, there's different varietals and vintners and vintages. Do you foresee cannabis being the same way as far as appellations, where something could only be a Malbec that's from a certain region?
Yeah, that's what we are working, like when I work mainly with sun-grown farmer. and small farmer. And because I'm in NorCal, we are trying to create appellation. But now it's like appellation, it's a big game that is defined by hardcore regulation. And the wine industry didn't want to play that game for good reason, because they needed the elbow space to really create their own wine, but because it's really hard to follow. And now the cannabis industry, they want to use the word appellation d'origine, but the word appellation d'origine, it's actually like champagne and cognac. You cannot use it if you don't do the deed for it. So yes, that's the ultimate reward that you can give to a producing country. And it applies only for sun-grown and fully grown in the ground. There is no pot, there is no greenhouse, all that cannot be an appellation d'origine. But on the other hand, you can create quality designation for every category that would bring up the level of quality and give recognition to the farmers that go the extra mile to produce great product. It's like it's something that can be used to define standard. The appellation d'origine, it's the ultimate standard that define the ultimate quality that is recognized for a region. So this can be applied to any type of farming.
I was just curious, is this on your website, this chart? Can I download this on your website? Where can I get a copy of this?
It's on my IG. It's gonna be in the next Skunk magazine, and we'll put it on the website. Yeah.
So when you were talking about the region, it's the terroir, right? Basically, is what we're talking about based on the environment and everything like that. My question is, you had mentioned that cannabis had come from basically all the regions were kind of on the same, is it latitude? It goes this way. So I remember reading somewhere that said that the Emerald Triangle was on the same latitude as Afghanistan, like the mountains. Do you know?
Yeah, but it has nothing to do with Afghanistan. It's like
I mean,
the
does that have to do
Emerald
with the
Triangle.
terroir?
It's not specifically a good place to grow cannabis, but it's an amazingly rich region, full of microclimate and an amazing soil. A lot of humidity in the air. You can grow the biggest tree, grow there. So it's like the thing is, cannabis has adapted very, very, very well there through generation in certain family, but it's not. You cannot compare it on a latitude scale with other producing country, because Afghanistan is very, very dry, very windy, quite the opposite of NorCal.
Hi, I was just wondering some clarification on hash. So you were saying how hashish, we don't want to confuse each other. So you were saying people who make BHO are not hash makers as opposed to...
No.
No?
They are resin extractor. They can find any name they want, but they don't do hashish. Hashish is the resin head collected, pressed with the source of it, that become a mass of resin.
Mm-hmm.
So anything that doesn't keep the matrix of the resin inside that mass of resin cannot be called hashish.
So do you find the term butane hash oil to be...
It's not butane hash oil, it's butane honey oil. It became butane hash oil because you use the word hash because it's less scary to the whole world than extraction. But you have no right to that word because it has nothing to do with your product. Simply, it's like even if you have no respect for tradition, it has nothing to do with what you do. It's like you will not call wine an alcohol because it's not. Wine is wine. and you don't call, you know what I mean? So it's like hashish is the same. And people in the booze industry, when they started to distillate, they created their own product and their own name. It's like, you're smoking weed. Can't you have more inspiration and find a word that really define the products you're making? And the problem also is like, because you keep your technique and your product under secret condition, you use names that define the product, but promote it in a certain way. But it's not something that is agreed upon everybody on the market. You know what I mean? A shatter, I've seen people call shatter, it's not a shatter. A shatter should shatter. A shatter that is not shattery is not shatter. You know what I mean? So like, even simple words like that are misused. So it's like we are legal. The world is looking at us, and we don't have a common vocabulary to define our main product. So now then it's like when you're gonna order a hash from me, but you want the taste of the chocolate from the Pinot Noir. Oh yeah, how are you gonna explain that? You know what I mean?
Hello, hi, good morning. So I have a question in regards to sativas and the whole hash processing. So basically, I have noticed that unfortunately, experimenting with some landrace cultivars doesn't have as much as oil content as majority of the sativa hybrids that we have available, like in the commercial market. So my concern is, with your experience in years of growing, how were you able to, or is there an effective way of maybe I can't use the word extracting here.
Collecting.
Okay. Thank you. Collecting the terpenes and the candy. I mean, separating or collecting from the sativa landrace cultivars. Thank you.
So the plant most certainly was born or in Central Asia or at the feet of the Himalaya. The feet of the Himalaya, this is it. It's super humid, super rich. There is no dust, there is no wind. The soil is rich. There is a huge insect life around. The plant grow lanky all over the place, quite tall. As soon as there is a little space, they branch like crazy, and they produce a very sticky resin that you actually collect on your hand. Okay? Then you step. Next door, it's the Pamir Mountain and the Hindu Kush. They basically kiss each other. But there you have no vegetation, it's super windy and super dusty. There is green only where there is water. And because there is no green, there is no insect life. So the plant grows short. Because they grow short, they need to make bigger leaves so that they can pump more sun. But at the same time, a resin super sticky in a place super dusty, then the resin is gonna get super dusty, and then it cannot function all the UV function, all the main function of the resin wouldn't be at full potential anymore. So because there is no insect, the plant doesn't need to be sticky, and so the membrane of the resin head from a pure kush is much thicker than a membrane of a pure landrace like Birman or South America or Africa. But you guys, you don't have sativa. Sativa, it's minimum 15 weeker. I'd like to smoke some, and nobody, if you have them, you're gonna harvest ahead of time. You have some heavy hybrids that have a tendency to go on each side. When you work with something that is more on the kush side, you don't need to go to extreme to work in a very cold condition. when you work with anything that is have a very tropical influence, you need to work in very cold conditions to be able to manipulate resin. It's like you use cold because resin is sticky. That's all. And to be able to manipulate it. When you sieve and the resin is sticky, when you break it away from the stock, if it's stuck to the plant material, you're not going to get it in your sieve material and through the perforation. So you work in very cold condition when you sieve. When you ice water, it's the same. And when you extract, a lot of extraction use cold also to be able to manipulate and at a deeper level the plant. Did I answer your question?
Thank you.
Hi, I just want to quick touch on something that I'm really a fan of with you, which is using cured resin. And maybe if you could just talk a little bit about the benefits of cured resin, and maybe if there's some type of chemical changes that the trichome or the resin head itself goes through in that process that makes the effect or even the end finished product of the medicine different from the flavor-driven, terpene-driven live resins.
Dried and cured resin, it's hashish. Live resin, it's charas. And it's two different, totally different products. And you cannot really compare it because the buzz is different, the texture, everything is different. When you dry a plant material, you lose 80%, 80% of your terre in the best condition. However, the 20% left, they're isomer bound. They go through an isomerization process that bounds their isomer and it gives you a different terpene profile. Different from just dry and very different than live. So what is the best? It's not because you lose 80% of your terre that that product is better than when you lose 80%. Because it's all a question of taste. The aficionado has a genetic called Pinot Noir. When it's live, it's like a field of flower with a lot of lavender. I'm from south of France. I'm very sensitive to lavender. I love that profile. But when you cure it, it's like chocolate. You have, like you smoke, you have chocolate in your mouth. I had never smoked chocolate before. So if you ask me, in that case, if I like cure better than live, hell yeah. So it's like, it's not a question of choice. It's so different. It's two different peaks of uniqueness and quality that the plant is giving you. You don't have one, you have two of them. And there is no comparison to be made except in lab testing what's the difference and what it brings to the table at the psychoactive and the medicinal level. Otherwise, as long as appreciation goes, well, it's just two greatness that the plant is giving you.
As far as that, with the chemical change, with the chemical, there is a chemical change, right? That's changing the flavor.
No, but what really changed? You transform your chlorophyll into sugar. And I rather smoke sugar than chlorophyll all day long. And as a hash maker, if you give me just cut flower trim, it's gonna bleed green. I'm gonna have a lot of chlorophyll in my ash, and I have no way to separate it. It's worse than doing live resin, where I have a little green seeping from the cut I gave to the plant. The chlorophyll is like in a vein system in a plant. You cut it, it bleeds. It doesn't bleed only when you freeze it, but you need to work super fast before it melts inside, because otherwise you're gonna have a lot of chlorophyll in that case, because freezing creates ice which is 10% bigger than water. So you literally explode from the inside out your plant matter, which is really bad. But if you work fast and good, the cut is cauterized and you have no green coming down. When it's just dry, that plant material, you cannot do anything. I've never tried to freeze it before working it, but if I freeze that material, I'm afraid to make the stock brittle, and that would be really bad as well, because then I have something that is not a resin head and the same size than a resin head in my bag. I have no way to separate it.
Okay, I think that is all for your presentation. Thank you so much. That was awesome.